Well, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar that's part of our Cancer Survivor to Financial Survivor webinar series. My name is Yeshua, and I will be facilitating this webinar series for the Canadian Cancer Survivor Network. On behalf of CCSN, I'd just like to thank you for attending tonight's webinar, Balancing Work and Caregiving. As you may know, CCSN is no stranger to webinars for our network of patients, caregivers, and survivors. The objective of this series, however, is to provide information and resources to help improve the financial situation experienced by cancer patients, caregivers, and their families as they navigate life with and after cancer. If you'd like to learn more about about CCSN, please visit our website at www.survivornet.ca. You'll find plenty of information there that on us, as well as news, events, and other resources that we think you'll find helpful. Two quick announcements before I hand things off to our presenters. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available shortly on YouTube. The video link will be sent out to the email you provided when registering, so you can share this resource or go back and watch it again if you like. The second thing is that at the end of our presentation, we'll have a short Q&A session. However, you don't feel the need to wait until the end to ask your questions. Feel free to type the questions into the window at the bottom right of your screen so we can have them queued up and ready for our presenters. So with that said, CCSN is pleased to welcome our two presenters for tonight. Felicia Hart is the Program and Service Lead for Workplace and Helpline at the Ontario Caregiver Organization, and Rani Sinanan is joining us as an experienced caregiver who hopes to raise as much awareness as possible about caregiving and the challenges caregivers face. So I'll hand things off to them.
Thank you so much for having us tonight and the introduction. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending this evening. So I am Felicia Hart, and I will be moderating our presentation today, Balancing Work and Caregiving. But before we begin, I would really like to take an opportunity to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands we are on today. I myself am coming to you from Clarington, Ontario, which is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa of the Anishinaabe, known today as the William Treaties First Nation. I came to be here through generations of immigration to this land. And at the Ontario Caregiver Organization, we are working to better understand how we can be meaningful allies and support the recommendation from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If you haven't already, I really suggest that you learn more about the Indigenous peoples and treaties for the land you live and work on at nativeland.ca. So the focus for today's session is really to learn more about caregiving experiences, what we're learning from caregivers, explore strategies for balancing work and care. I'm also going to give some examples of some federal and provincial financial benefit options available. And then we're going to look at how we can access resources and support options after today. So who is the Ontario Caregiver Organization? So we started out in 2018, and we were tasked with improving the lives of Ontario's caregivers, who are ordinary people providing physical and emotional support to a family member, partner, friend, or neighbor. At the center of our work are caregivers themselves. We work very closely with caregivers across our province as we continue to develop programs, information, resources, various services, and we collaborate with other organizations across the province as well, who are offering very specialized services to caregivers and to those who they support. So we do this, and I'll give more information as we go through, but we do this by providing a lot of different public information and tools. We have direct caregiver programs and services, and of course we do a lot of outreach as we continue to gather the insights and engage caregivers across Ontario. So at the core of this work, and the most importantly, are the caregiver stories, what all of this really looks like for caregivers who are living this every day. And so I would like to introduce Rani, who is going to tell us more about her caregiving experience.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here, Felicia. and CCSN. I really appreciate this opportunity. First off, I just wanted to say my name's Rani, and I've been a caregiver, a full-time caregiver since 2019. My parents were diagnosed with cancer 3 months apart from each other. And actually, my mom was diagnosed 2 days before I was supposed to go back to school as a teacher, teaching grade 6. So it was a quite challenging time, and I quickly realized that things were going to be extremely difficult. So I made the decision to quit my job and to become their full-time caregiver. And that meant, of course, going on EI shortly after, and dealing with all the financial challenges that came our way as well. You know, EI quickly ran out. I think I was done before the end of the year. And so, you know, the thought of not having an income coming in while I'm caregiving was weighing heavily on my shoulders. And I really didn't want to burden my parents with that, you know, that fear as well. So I was trying to figure out a way that I could work, if possible, and provide care for them at the same time. And it was really difficult trying to find a way to do that. Obviously, I couldn't go back to teaching. So I had approached a few other employers trying to figure out if there was a way to maybe work part-time. And that became difficult too, because not everybody was open to the idea of allowing a caregiver, full-time caregiver, to work part-time, because obviously you have responsibilities at work. On top of that, COVID happened and the lockdown happened, and my husband was laid off as a result of that. So financially, things became really challenging for us. Even one of my old bosses had approached me saying, hey, I'll give you this job, you can work part-time for us. But having worked for them before, I knew that the job would be all-encompassing and would require more than just you know, a few hours in a day of my time. And that became really challenging because, of course, all caregivers know this. When you're caring for somebody, the trials and tribulations come and go in waves. So some days are great, some days are not so great. And that means, you know, having to give more attention to the person you're providing care for. And, you know, another really big thing for me was, because I was caring for my parents, I often told them, you have to stop looking at me as your daughter and start looking at me as your caregiver. And that meant waking me up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, letting me know how you're feeling so that I can, you know, be a better caregiver for them. And I could relate this information to their doctors. And that also meant me not getting much sleep. So how was I supposed to really, you know, split myself working and caregiving and even taking care of myself? It was really challenging. You know, with COVID came those benefits, the COVID benefits, which at first I was really ecstatic about. I thought they were really great. And I was really nervous when I saw the caregiver one, because I was like, oh, finally something that, you know, we caregivers can apply to and get support from the government. And so I called, I remember this clear as ever. I called twice before I actually hit the apply button online for the benefit, and I spoke to 2 different representatives. I said, here's my situation. I didn't actually quit my job because of COVID, but I am a full-time caregiver. My parents, because of their conditions, I'm not able to return back to work, not even on a part-time basis. And I really was trying to find out, should I even apply? Do I, you know, am I considered an appropriate applicant for this benefit? And both individuals that I spoke to said, yeah, go for it, apply for it. And so I did. And of course, as we all know, we all get audited. And unfortunately, I was forced to pay back the benefits that I received, and it amounted to almost $5,500. So not having worked for so long, it was really challenging to pay back that money, because that money did come in handy to pay for medications or, you know, anything that was needed medically wise for my parents. It was really difficult. And, you know, I always think back to the time when my parents first started their chemo treatments. They had to take these needles, and one of those needles costed $4,500 and another one costed $2,800. And when we first heard about the prices of those needles, our jaws dropped and we were like, how are we going to even do this? But thankfully, they both had amazing oncologists who were able to connect with the company that makes the needles and work something out. And we didn't actually have to pay, you know, anything. But that thought of having to pay for those needles, and my mom had to take, you know, one of those needles 7 days after treatment, and my dad was 9 days after treatment. So, you know, 4,500 times 9, that's a lot of money. Like, that's a lot of stress as well, emotional and mental stress to take on, not only as the patient, but then as the caregiver too, because you want to shield, you know, the person that you're providing care for from all of these difficulties. You don't want them to have to carry that burden or that stress on their head, especially when they're dealing with, you know, in our case, cancer. They're already trying to build up as much strength as they can. And so as the caregiver, I often try to protect them and shield them from those challenges that we faced. And internally in my own life and personally, it became really challenging for me too, to see the end of the tunnel. But I think one thing for me was I never stopped giving up. I never stopped trying to find a way. And when I stumbled across the OCO, I was so thankful for that, because they really did help me, you know, try to find possibilities, different ways that I could look for financial support, and not even just on the financial side. They were there to support me emotionally, mentally, which was great, with their peer one-on-one support groups and other support groups that they have. It was really great to find that and to use those resources. And that's one thing I can't stress enough to other caregivers. We often think that our bubble is just surrounding us. We don't realize that there are resources for us outside of that bubble that we live in. And it's sometimes, and unfortunately, we aren't educated enough. People aren't talking about caregivers. People aren't talking about the resources for caregivers. And so I'm, you know, pleading to each and every one of you on here, if you are a caregiver, if you know somebody who's a caregiver, share the resources that Felicia is going to be sharing with you all today. They're great resources. Financially, you can learn about what benefits are available to you. And you know, if you can have these types of conversations with your employers, I know a lot of us are afraid to speak up and to share that we are a caregiver because we're afraid that we will internally lose our job being a caregiver. That type of stress that we carry, it's a really, you know, it's a really hard and difficult thing to carry. I was a huge fan of makeup. I tried to, you know, do a makeup business on social media. I tried to take that and turn it around in a really positive way. So every single month I would create a look based on the cancer awareness for that month, and based on the cancer ribbon. And so I started sharing information about cancer through, you know, social media and using makeup as my avenue. But unfortunately, I couldn't actually turn that into a business either, because my mom's condition deteriorated with time. And so my responsibilities with caregiving became more and more demanding, and I wasn't able to keep up with that too. So, you know, if there was that financial support, that benefit, you know, had I not had to pay back that benefit and I could have continued getting it, maybe then I would have been a little bit more at ease, so to speak, because I wouldn't have been thinking in my head, oh, I haven't worked for so long. I haven't had an income for so long. And, you know, those are really important things that we think about, that we stress about. So whatever resources that you can get access to, if you can share it with anybody, please do, because you can actually make a huge difference in their life. You can make them feel like there is hope and that they're not in a solitary bubble by themselves. It's really important. There's so many other things that you know, come to mind, but those are just some of the few things that I wanted to share with you all about my own experience. Unfortunately, we lost my mom last year. We're actually a few days away from the 1-year death anniversary, and I'm still not working, but I am a new mom now, and so I'm looking forward to finding how I can pursue, you know, different opportunities to, you know, financially get myself back on track and, you know, find what works for me too as well. So that's my story. Thank you so much, Felicia.
Thank you so much, Rani. I'm sure everyone on here can understand the courage that it takes to tell your story, to share your experience, and I'm so grateful that you're here this evening to share all of this with us. And I think it's just incredibly important because as we continue our session today, these are the real life examples that we need to keep in mind. And just hearing about the ways that you found to, you know, still have that hope, find that support, create a community around you. I think these are incredible lessons learned through your experience that a lot of people could apply to their lives as well and their caregiving experience. So thank you so much. And with that, I definitely want to keep kind of reflecting on Rani's story as we go through some of the content for today's session. And we can definitely use this as a basis for how we can do better. And I also think that it's a really great example of how we can build caregiver insights, you know, things that people are really going through, things that are working for them, things that are not, and really start to build awareness around those insights on how we can improve things, right? So Rani is not alone. And I'm sure there's many of you sitting here today thinking, I've been through something similar, or that's kind of like my story, right? And so what we do know is that across our province alone, there are 4 million caregivers. Now, if you think about that from a Canadian context, we're sitting at about 8.1 million caregivers right now. So there's a lot of us. I myself am also a working caregiver. It's one of the things that drove me to work for this organization. And the other thing that's important to remember is that the majority of caregivers are actually between the ages of 36 to 65. Now at the OCO, we do a spotlight report every year, and this is how we gather this information. And so if you think about what everyone's doing between those ages of 36 to 65, at this point, a lot of people have really moved forward in their career. They have a lot of knowledge and experience behind them. As you're getting into your 60s, you're thinking about retirement, sometimes a little earlier than that, but think about that wealth of knowledge and experience in the workforce during that age group, right? And so this just confirms how we need to build more awareness around the work of caregivers in their personal life and then how that's impacting the workforce. We've also noticed over the last year or so that we're seeing a more even split between male and female caregivers. So right now it's sitting at about 54% for female caregivers and 45% male, 1% identifying as non-binary. So I think that's a really nice example too of how we're seeing the landscape change a little bit. And what we know in Ontario is that 69% of our 4 million caregivers that we were able to reach and really gain insights from are reporting that they are employed. So that's a large chunk of our workforce. It's also important to think about who people are caring for, because then we know what types of supports, resources to ensure that they have access to, right? So just to give you a sense of what this looks like, about 82% of people are caring for one person, which is usually an older family member, often a parent. But we are noticing that about 1 in 5 are actually caring for more than one person. So, and that's similar to Rani's story, caring for both parents living with cancer who were diagnosed around the same time, right? So that's a lot of extra care to provide for 2 people. We've also noticed that 46% are caring for the person in the caregiver's home. 38% are going into the care recipient's home, so that family member or friend to provide the care. That's important because the dynamics, of course, are very different if you're living together while caregiving, while working. Some people really feel like that is the natural way to go, especially when it comes to the financial sides of things, kind of really putting together anything that anyone brings into the home financially, and having a place that everyone can live together. But we also know that the stress levels on caregivers tend to increase when they are living in the same home. The majority of caregivers do report that. So again, these are just things that we need to be mindful of as we continue talking through some of the other content today. So there are many different impacts of caregiving. One thing that I do hear from caregivers a lot in my work and what I feel myself is that there are days where you're just so glad that you have the opportunity to be there for the person that you care for and build that relationship. Other times you really start to see the other impacts, right? Like with on your own personal time, the time commitments that you have to put forward, the impact on finances, your own health and wellness, but then also on other personal relationships. Sometimes you just don't have the time that you used to put into your friendships or with other relationships. But the thing that we're really going to narrow our focus on today is the impact on your employment and your work-life balance. The other thing I just wanted to draw a little attention to here, and because we can't ignore the pandemic, right? We've all been through a lot through this. And so caregivers, we've been tracking, how are they feeling through the pandemic? What are some changes that they saw? And just a little highlight for you is that 58% of caregivers throughout the pandemic have reported that they feel just completely burnt out. They are exhausted. Many are saying that their stress levels and their mental health is actually worse compared to a year ago. And this will be updated again. As I said, we do these spotlight reports every year, so it's coming out soon. But it's just interesting to really track those trends and see the changes that caregivers have seen through the pandemic alone with all of those extra stressors and pressures. So what else are working caregivers telling us? We definitely hear all the time, I feel like I'm juggling 2 full-time jobs at once. And so when we look at this from a larger perspective, we've got about 35% of the workforce in Canada who is caring for someone with a physical or mental health need. So if you think about the number of people you have at your workplace, or if you've left the workplace, how many people were there, to think that a large percentage of them could be going through the same thing and just not feeling comfortable to come out and talk about it, not really sure what their options are. So there's a lot of stigma there still to really talk through what that experience is. That's a large group of people. We've also noticed that 1 in 3 are really worried about losing their job. So is it noticeable that I'm not doing as much work as I think I should be doing? What do I do here? Am I going to lose my job because I'm really having to put a lot of effort into my caregiving? And then 10% are actually turning down job opportunities. So again, Rani, you mentioned that too. You had an opportunity from your previous boss, but you knew you just couldn't take it on because of your caregiving needs. There's also a lot of concerns right now for those who have been able to work remotely. They're very concerned about these hybrid models or actually going back full-time into a physical workplace setting, mainly because of the risk of COVID-19 infection and how that's going to impact the people they care for, as well as the loss of flexibility. And we've noticed about 74% of caregivers are reporting that they are actively making alterations to their employment. So maybe that means you're going to you're going to part-time hours from full-time hours, or you're actually leaving and going to another job that can offer the flexibility that you're looking for. So at this stage, we've thrown a lot of information at you. It can start feeling a little heavy, right? And so I think it's really important before we start getting into some of our tips and strategies to take a breath and take a moment to think about the number of valuable skills that also come along with balancing caregiving and work. When this work started for this Caregiving in the Workplace program, one of our working caregivers, Carrie, was a part of that and really helped to build this program. And what she had said was, don't forget about all the valuable skills. The fact is, caregiving does teach us a lot about resilience, which then transfers into our working life so we can easily adapt to changing situations. And you also learn to be really flexible and have good judgment in times where you don't have a lot of opportunity to stop and think things through fully, right? So you need to make some quick judgment calls. And so, of course, a lot of this can be seen as skills that you can then take into your workplace as well. It's not all one-sided where it's incredibly stressful. There's also a lot of things that come from this as well that we can bring into work. So let's start getting into some strategies. Now that we've got a sense of the caregiving experience, it's possible that many of you feel this is resonating with you and what you've been through. We're understanding the landscape a little bit more. We've heard from Rani. What can we actually do about all of this? And so the first thing to remember is that you've got to be easy on yourself. I connect with caregivers every day through our helpline service as well. And the fact is, we try to do it all, but we're human and we can't always do it all alone, right? And so to get started, what I've done for today's session to really keep this simple for us is I've broken it down into 4 main areas that you could really start to focus on. So the first 2 steps here are taking some time to really identify where is support most needed for me in my caregiving role. So in this first part here, we're really thinking about home life, caregiving life. And there are 2 main areas that we can really start to focus on. I mentioned we don't have to do this all alone. Rani also mentioned that there are supports available. Maybe it's not exactly what you were looking for. So maybe you started out looking for more financial support, but you're not getting exactly what you need based on eligibility requirements currently. But what else can be done? And so this is where some of our tools that I will highlight can help you think through the tasks you do every day. What are some of the things that are really getting in the way for you when you're trying to balance both work and care? Through that, you can also start to think about things that you might be able to bring in other people to support you with. So one thing that we hear a lot is people in our life who are very well-meaning will say, if you need anything, let me know. And that's really nice to hear, but sometimes then you think, well, now I got to do a lot of work thinking about what I even need, right? And so some of the tools can actually help you figure out what tasks you'd be willing to give to somebody else that you could trust and really build them in for support. And from there, you can start to build your team. So in your natural support circle, maybe you've got some friends, you've got some other relatives, or even a neighbor that you can really trust to assist. And then you also have to think about providers for you. We spend a lot of time booking appointments and taking people to appointments that we care for, but you can't forget about your own health as well. So it's a really great opportunity to stop and pause. And these are 2 resources that can really help you do that, our Healthcare Journey Binder and the I Am a Caregiver Starter Toolkit. And they can help you track all of this information and really work through step by step. What do I do every day? Where do I need the most support? Who can actually start to help me with that? So this leads us into how we can actually start finding some of those services. Now, of course, everyone's situation is different, but you need to take some time to learn what is available to you. So you take stock of what you need, what's available in your community, reviewing some financial resources, benefit options, government programs, grants, and then again, who is there to help share in all of this, right? And depending on your community, that too will look different. But there are some different things, and sometimes we got to get creative. So not only are we going to look at, okay, what support options are available to me when it comes to mental health, wellness, respite opportunities, things along those lines, but I know financial is a big piece for people. So one of the things that I would suggest is really starting with the Canada Benefits Finder, so you can use this across Canada. And from there, when you put in different keywords or things that you need, it'll come up as of right now, what are some things available? And then from there, you can start to see the breakdowns of eligibility requirements for those funds. There's also federal and provincial tax credits available for dependents and family caregivers. So that's another place that I would suggest starting. And as Rani mentioned as well, there is an employment insurance option for caregiving leave, but we do have to be careful when we're looking at that to see, do I truly fit the eligibility requirements of this? Is this going to be a Band-Aid solution where I have some funds now and may need to pay back later? So again, just being really aware of any eligibility, and if something isn't quite a fit, you want to think about that a little bit longer, right? And see if it's worth kind of going through that process. Now, if these things just aren't fitting for you and you've already done this and you're still not getting what you need, this is when you got to think creatively. And we're here to help you. So I'll mention our services later, especially our helpline. We have a 24/7 helpline where they can help walk through some of these options, not only for the financial services, but also for any of the other supports that you might need. So one thing that I bring up sometimes when I'm working with caregivers is in Ontario, we have an energy board program where there are some opportunities for people to get energy costs a little lower and go into a program for assistance. So that's one thing. Another thing is in every region, there are different community-based supports when it comes to helping with utility costs or other household costs, such as service clubs or not-for-profits. So if you think about Salvation Armies, Lions Clubs, things along those lines, many of them will actually have programs that you can apply for to assist you with some things when it comes to utility costs especially. So even if you're not getting those benefits that you're really going in for and looking for, there could be some other solutions there. So now that you know, at this stage, you'll have a sense of what's available to you, what you really need. Now is when we can really start to plan our action steps. And we do have a toolkit for working caregivers. Now, this toolkit was designed alongside working caregivers across Ontario, as well as the Ontario Works, which is through the Canadian Mental Health Association. And so the purpose of this toolkit is to take all of these ideas and break them down into steps that you can work through as you can. Again, I know this is a lot of work, and the last thing you need is more put on you. But in order to really figure out what's going to be best for you and how to take some of this, all of the things that you're learning into the workplace, we've got to work it through and be ready for those conversations, right? So now I'm going to talk through some of these steps that we can pull out from our toolkit. So you spent time earlier thinking about what's available in your personal life to support you. Now it's time to learn about the options at work. So if you're at that point where you're feeling burnt out, you're thinking, okay, it's either I figure something out how to be more flexible in my work or I need to leave. This is a really good time to really start taking stock of what's available to you. Again, a lot of people aren't comfortable just going to their supervisor talking this out. And a lot of employers are trying to figure out how to best support their employees, but they may not understand what your current situation is, right? So the first thing you want to do is think through what programs and resources are available in your workplace. Is there an employee assistance program? You know, are there, access to other emergency care situations or benefits or leaves that could be paid or partially paid through your employer? And then you also want to think about, depending on your sector, are there opportunities for flexible working hours so you can still take care of appointments or things along those lines, work around care schedules if you have someone coming into the home to assist with care? Can you work remotely? Job sharing, those types of options. So it really depends on what you're looking for and also what's available in the workplace. A lot of people forget about that human resource manual that they're handed when they first start their job. And so this is a good chance to kind of weed through that and figure out what's available to me. The next step here is to really assess, what do I do in my work every day? What are some of the meetings or some of the tasks that I feel are just incredibly difficult to pursue right now, to complete in my work day? And then you can kind of think and reflect through that and go through a decision aid tool that we have in the toolkit to work through some of those options, weighing your pros and cons. Could this actually be helpful? Are there some other ideas that I found as I looked through that manual or as I talked to my supervisors to get a sense of what benefits are available to me? So I know we're going through this quickly because we only have a certain amount of time tonight, but I'm hoping this is giving you a sense of that flow that you can use and the information that you can gather as you continue to make decisions within your work. So when we created this toolkit, we also sat down with employers across the province and said, what are ways people can be most successful when they're coming to you to have a discussion about how they're having a hard time balancing caregiving with their work? And so these are the things that they suggested. This is what they would want from their employees if they needed to do this. And the number one thing is to really make room for this. Make time that you and your supervisor can sit down and really discuss through this. Now, you don't have to share absolutely everything because there's confidentiality, of course, too, right? Not only for you, but for the person that you care for. But share what you're comfortable with. Usually you have a good sense of your workplace culture And usually you have a sense of the relationship with your supervisor and your coworkers. But the number one thing is to really try and break down your message, keep it simple. When you're coming into the discussion, you've already done your homework. So you know what's available, you know what the gap areas are. You've started to think about some potential solutions. So you want to share your commitment, you want to be open, and really be realistic about what are the employer's needs, what are the workplace needs, and then what are my needs. So trying to make sure that you're kind of balancing those discussion points. And another thing that could be really helpful is if you've gone through the toolkit and you've done that checklist, you've come up with some ideas that you're bringing forward to your supervisor, you want to have that written out, maybe follow up in writing afterwards through an email, just to say this is a summary of our discussion and the things that we're looking at as we move forward in this. So these are some of the things that can help you really get to that stage of talking it through. If you get to a point where, okay, we figured out some solutions here, we're going to implement some of these changes, you don't want to forget about the reassessment piece. So we do have a key responsibilities work plan template available in the toolkit as well. And the idea is to look through your work duties, any changes, and then you want to look at that, whether it's a month from the point of implementation of those changes, 6 months or a year, right? You want to pre-plan those with your supervisor to go back and take a look. Are there any new changes? Did you think that having some flexible hours was going to make a really big difference and it isn't, in fact? Got to go back to the drawing board, maybe consider some other things. How is this impacting you at home? How is this impacting coworker relationships? It's really important to make time for that reassessment piece so you can be successful and your employer can feel like you're all on the same page. I'm going to give you one little example of what a few people I know that have come through this program have done. And it sounds really simple, but it made a big difference for them. Some people had meetings or, just touch points with their teams where they had to report on what was going on in their area of the organization or the company. And those meetings were just at super inconvenient times when it came to caregiving responsibilities. So the small shift was that they changed the meeting time. Or at another workplace, they actually said, well, we can't go ahead and change the meeting time because there's just so many people involved in this and we need that information at that point in the week. But how about you could do the work that you normally do to prepare, and then our coworker can present on your behalf. Then we'll keep you updated as to what happens. So it's just simple changes like that. In other instances, in sectors where people can't work remotely, they say, even if I just have a space where I can go, make a phone call to check in on the person I care for, or take a phone call when something urgent comes up, a private space where not everyone can hear me, but then also I don't feel like I'm being judged from walking away from my job at that moment and taking a short break to have a phone call. That would make a big difference for me. So then it was making it possible for that person to go into the break room and they really needed to take those calls, and knowing that no one on that team, including the supervisor, was going to judge them for walking away in that moment. So sometimes they can be simple, sometimes they need to be larger changes, like breaking down your hours into part-time as an example, or the job sharing opportunities. But it just goes to show you that there's a lot of different things that you can do to make things easier at work as well. So again, I know this is short, but I hope that does give you a sense of some things that you can start to do when you're balancing home and caregiving as well as your work needs. But I also wanted to note that not only do we work alongside working caregivers, we also do collaborate with employers across the province. And we have created tools for employers, so on their end, they can be actively and thinking about what they can do better for their caregiving employees, engage people in the workplace to build that culture of support and being caregiver inclusive. So it's not all on the working caregiver. We also know that employers need to think about what they can do too, and many have come forward to work alongside us to think about what are some changes that we can make, how can we be proactive, what's some language that we can put into our policies and procedures so our employees know that caregiving matters and that we know many of them could be caregiving employees. And so we do continue to work alongside them. We have tailored training sessions, e-learning, and a guide that mirrors the toolkit for caregivers. So, it would be great, a dream world really, where you would have an employer who's got the guide for employers, and then you have the working caregiver who has their toolkit. and the tools and templates all work together so both sides can come prepared. So, I mean, that would be best case scenario and what we're really trying to work towards. So just to recap, I'm going to start now getting into what's available to you over the next few minutes, those tools, resources, things you can access after today's session. As I said, we've got our toolkit, we have templates for assessing, planning, implementation. We continue to do information sessions like today, only sometimes we're able to do a deep dive into some of those steps and some of those key areas. This is more of a general overview so you can get a sense of what's available and some of the ideas that we've put together. We also have that 24/7 helpline available to any caregiver across province. If you're in a different province, I'm going to get to some other resources that you can access. But even if someone called from out of province to our helpline, we make sure that we connect them with something available near them. We also have in our guide for employers some workplace standards and any Canadian research findings that are coming forward right now too. It's really important to note that there are other groups working on this. So there's organizations similar to ours in different provinces across the country. There's also Carers Canada, who are really working on building the profile for working caregivers across the country, and building out other tools that are complementary to what we offer. And then McMaster University seems to really be that research hub right now when it comes to interventions in the workplace and how that's having an impact on working caregivers as well as employers. So that's something that we continue to build into all of our information and resources that we provide. So we don't have time for a full-on exercise this evening, but I do just want to say it's Wednesday. And Wednesday, Thursday can be a really great time to stop and say, okay, I'm midweek. Have I had any time for me this week? How am I actually feeling? What do I need to do for me? You know, can I grab an hour a day? Can I grab a couple hours on Friday that are just for me? I think this is something that caregivers, especially when they're balancing both worlds, don't stop and do. And it's incredibly important for your health and well-being. It could be as simple as taking a walk, listening to a podcast for 30 minutes, you know, maybe catching up with a friend that you haven't had a chance to talk to in a while. So I really encourage you, if you haven't yet, take some time to think about you, take some time for yourself if you can, even if it's just that 30 minutes, that hour. So after today, the hope is that this isn't the end of the conversation, right? So I'm going to provide my information at the end, but I really do want to highlight what we have available to you. And, you know, even if you're not getting everything you needed out of today's session, there's a lot of information that you can access. No matter where you are in Canada, you can access our website. The resources that we have, you can download. You can attend our webinars. We have a number of different tools and tip sheets. We have e-newsletters that we really use to push out any new resources or information that hopefully could be really helpful to you and your needs as a caregiver. We also do, like I said, work very closely with other organizations who specialize in cancer, as an example for this evening, and other conditions or illnesses. So we do work with others to ensure that caregivers are finding the supports they need in their community based on the condition of the person that they're caring for and based on their individual needs. So if we don't have it, chances are someone in your community can provide that service. And so we do make it a priority to find the services near you first and that are specialized based on what you're going through. We also have a Time to Talk podcast, so along with the webinars that we provide and our website, that there is a podcast where we have subject matter experts and caregivers really going through topics that caregivers have told us that are important to them. So you can listen to that on any streaming service for podcasts. We also recently added a 90-second caregiver service. So this is actually something that you receive by email. All of our programs and services are at no cost, okay? They're free. And we also deliver them in English and French. And this includes things like this, where you can get short evidence-based health letters delivered to your email each week. And you can kind of choose if you want to learn more about those topics. And it really helps to make things easy to go through any new tips or advice related to caregiving experiences. And that keeps things really fresh based on the different topics. I mentioned our helpline. So again, 24/7, we've got chat available 7 to 9, Monday to Friday. This is all about finding you information and referrals and connecting you to the support you need, again, in the community, but we also help people register for our programs as well if that's of interest. We do have it available French and English, but there's also multi-languages available through interpretation services if you do call in over 150 languages. It is a confidential service, but it's not a crisis line. If someone does call and they need a crisis intervention, our specialists are available to ensure that we have you warm transferred to a crisis service or 911 as applicable. But it's just good to know that this could be a resource that you could turn to as a starting point at the very least. And we do offer that program in partnership with 211 across the province. I mentioned some other things that we have available. I want to make sure we have time for questions, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but we do monthly webinars, sometimes a couple a month, but normally we stick to one. And these are the different topics that, for an example, that we go through. And we also make sure that our recordings are available on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you ever miss something, you can definitely catch up. One of our really popular programs is our SCALE program. So this stands for Supporting Caregiver Awareness, Learning, and Empowerment. And this is an 8-week psychoeducational program, and they work through these main topics. This also helps people tap into some free individual counseling and group counseling. Now, we only offer it twice a year, but we also make sure that any of the recordings from these sessions are available on the SCALE webpage on our website. If it's something that right now we don't have it running, so if you go on there, you can kind of look through to get a sample of what that looks like and then sign up again for it in a couple of months. We have peer support, one-to-one, as well as support groups. Again, you can find more information on our website about that and get registered if you're interested. E-learning is a big part of what we do too. Caregivers had told us, I wasn't prepared for this caregiving role and what it would entail. So we were able to work with them to develop 3 main e-learning modules. We also have them for healthcare providers and employers too, like I mentioned. So you can check that out. Once you create a profile one time, you have access to all the e-learning modules. So I also mentioned that we ensure that we have caregiver insights and an opportunity to work directly with caregivers. So there are a number of different opportunities if you're interested. I know this information can be shared with you, so you can learn more about that. We have working groups, advisory panels, things along those lines. And if you're in Ontario, you'll also see us on the radio. You'll hear us on the radio sometimes. Sometimes you'll see us on TV, and then other times you'll receive something in your mailbox like what you see on your screen here, which just gives an overview of what we do and how to get connected. Now, I don't want to forget to go over this very quickly. If you're coming from a province outside of, if that's not Ontario today, so somewhere else in Canada, there are other organizations that you can tap into for direct support. Like I said, feel free to attend our webinars, check out the e-learning, download any resources we have, but there's also other organizations providing direct to caregiver services. And there's my information. So if you have any questions after today or you want to connect, I'm always happy to do so. And I know we want to give some time now for some questions from everybody. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much to both Felicia and Rani for such an incredibly informative and just helpful session. That was great. That was jam-packed with information. If you are on live, I just popped the 2 handouts in your session. Hopefully you receive them. If not, there are links that will be sent out to your email as well that contain the information that Felicia just shared with us, both the caregiver support across Canada 2022 PDF and one with Ontario Caregiver Organization Programs and Services, which is a virtual handout as well. One quick question before we actually jump into the questions that have come in. You mentioned the toolkit. Is that something that we can find online on your website as well?
Yes, sorry. And it's also in the list of the program and services handout that I provided. I actually highlighted it there for people. So you can click on that and download it for free. Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. That this is exactly why we're doing this webinar series. CCSN has noticed there are very few, if any, resources that are easily accessible for people, caregivers and patients and survivors alike, particularly as it comes to financial resources. And so we're really glad to be able to partner with OCO and other organizations similar to you, and to hear stories from people like Rani and so many of our other advocates. So this has been a fantastic session. Again, if you have questions, we have a few that have come in already, but now is the perfect time to write them in, and we'll start off with a comment, actually. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Rani. So many parallels with mine, and it's so comforting.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to be able to share my story and hopefully help someone else. Thank you so much.
We have a question here that asks, how do you suggest that caregivers attend to the emotional aspect of working in caregiving? How can, I guess it's a two-part question, so I'll let you answer the first one. And then, yeah, so how do you suggest caregivers attend to the emotional aspects of working in caregiving?
Rani, I want to give you a chance to jump in case you have something to share with that, or would you like me to go ahead first?
You can go ahead first.
Okay, yeah, so this is such a great question. And I know we were really like tactical in what we went over today, but of course there is the wellness and emotional side of things. And what seems to be helpful for a lot of caregivers, and again, like we can hear comments on this, is thinking about the things like before caregiving, before you really became entrenched in that role, what brought you to life? You know, outside of your career, what made you feel like you? What brought you that joy? And even if you can't do all of those things right now, what are some ways you could start to build that in again? I hear from a lot of people, you know, caregivers always have these amazing hidden talents. And so sometimes when I'm connecting with them, they'll say, you know, I used to really love just painting and making time for art, making time for creative things, or I really love mechanical items and just kind of puttering about. So it's a matter of just making that time and space, whatever you can. Like I said, sometimes it's only 30 minutes, you know, or maybe it's an hour, hopefully within your day, or a couple hours a week. But you might be exhausted and think, I'd rather just take a rest. But maybe a couple times a week, you make that time to sit down and do those things that you used to, even if it's just like a small version of that. Or even like the socialization side of things. So many of us haven't been able to be as social as we once were and meet up with friends or family members. So maybe it's going for a walk, grabbing a coffee, whatever that looks like for you. But I would highly suggest even just making a few minutes for something that used to really make you happy before caregiving.
Thank you. Of course, and oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, like, of course, reaching out for services that you think would be really helpful to have somebody who's outside of the situation and just listen, right? Just have someone to listen, someone to talk to. It could be counseling, it could be peer support, anything like that.
Yeah, I was just going to say Felicia hit all the points there. When I started caregiving and I quickly was starting to burn out, I really had to take some time to figure out what worked for me, what could help me deal with my role as a caregiver on an emotional scale, mentally. And so I started meditating. I also started doing some reading some scriptural books. I love walking, so I would try and get in a walk every single day. Those are just some of the things that I loved doing prior to being a caregiver, and I tried to fit into my life after caregiving as well. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The second part of that question is kind of different, but But along the same lines, I think you two just took it in a different direction than the second part, but this is great. So how can caregivers mitigate their emotions and stress enough to be efficient at work without showing emotions and having everyone wondering what is wrong?
You know what? Sometimes it's not possible to do that. And that's because we are human beings. And I think what I've heard a lot from employers themselves is that, especially through the pandemic, when our personal lives really became front and center at our workplaces sometimes, is that can we build cultures where you don't have to hide it, right? Can there be enough of an understanding as the workplace builds that type of culture where there's going to be a sense of, okay, they're not themselves today, and that's okay, and it's not necessarily something they want to discuss at great length or that they should have to discuss in the workplace, but maybe that's just a really hard day for that person. How can we work together as a team to ensure that the things that really need to get done, that are priority, get done? I've also heard from caregivers that if they have felt comfortable speaking to their supervisor and having that discussion that we talked about earlier, it kind of sets it up for those moments where they can just say, you know what, today's a really rough one. These are my priority items that I know I need to make happen today, and these are the things that I'm going to have to get through to another day. And there's just this new understanding and support developed within that. That may not be possible in every sector, I know, and that may look different depending on the workplace, but I think this is why we're doing this, right? Like, this is why we have this Caregivers in the Workplace program, why we're working with employers to really look at how we can make things more inclusive for caregivers and the realities they face. And the fact is, we saw those stats. This isn't something that anyone can get away from at any workplace. Anyone could become a caregiver at any point in their career. So this is a really must do as opposed to a nice to have, right?
And if I could just add something really quick to that too. I think in order to even get to that point, you yourself have to acknowledge yourself as a caregiver. I think oftentimes we don't acknowledge ourselves as a caregiver, and it isn't until we say, you know what, I actually am a caregiver, I'm living the life of a caregiver, that we put ourselves in that position to open that door to conversations with our employers or with people around us, you know, that we should be respected and acknowledged as caregivers on the other side of things. And sometimes just acknowledging that, saying, hey, I am a caregiver and these are my needs, that in of itself can help build, you know, emotional and mental strength and support for that person, and allow other people to also share in that, you know, in that wealth of strength too.
Thank you for those answers. We have another question here that asks, caregiving has taken over my life, even when I try to take time for myself. Any suggestions on how to turn off thinking about caregiving all the time?
Oh man, I was horrible for that. There wasn't a time of the day that I was not caregiving. I was not thinking about it. I would go to sleep thinking about it. I'd wake up thinking about it. While I'm in the shower, I'm thinking about caregiving and whether my parents are okay. Honestly, I think the only way I was able to turn off that switch and actually take a few minutes for myself was when I really realized what it was doing to me. I had to acknowledge what was happening to my body, what was happening to my mental health, and before I could actually, you know, turn that switch off for a little bit. And so I think, you know, sitting down and really seeing how it's impacted you, and, you know, nothing's wrong with caregiving, nothing's wrong with, you know, wanting to be there 24/7 for the people that you're caring for. But I think realizing that you are a human being as well, and you have to care for your health and your well-being too. And sometimes we need to put ourselves first in some, you know, in many situations in order to be a better caregiver. Like, you have to provide care for yourself in order to provide care for someone else. And it's a little hard to say, and it's a little hard to hear, but that's something that I would suggest to any caregiver.
I love that, Rani. And the other thing that I've done, just supporting caregivers one-to-one, is a strategy that you can put into place where you say, okay, I have this many hours in my day, or sometimes you look at it as a week, depending on what happens, that I can put towards my caregiving responsibilities. And then this time is my protected time. Now, sometimes things will come up that are unexpected, but then you have a little wiggle room to shift things around, right? But you know that you have to have a certain amount of protected time within that week. And once you really start to practice that and make it happen, then it becomes a part of your reality. And yes, there's going to be times where that's still coming into your mind, what I'm not doing for the person that I care for. I'm worried about them. But eventually, as you continue to practice those things, you start to have time to focus on yourself again, knowing that you've also protected time for them and their care.
That's great. If there's any other questions, we're just about out of time. But if there's any other questions, feel free to type them into the chat and we will take a look at them. But again, I just want to remind everyone that, like, as much as OCO is Ontario centric, the resources that Felicia has shared with us are national. And if you are tuning in from another province, and the last 3 weeks specifically have been very Ontario centric, I just hope that if there are resources you're aware of, you can reach out to me personally at changecancer@survivornet.ca. That's my email address. Or you can reply to the emails that you get from this webinar. Actually, they come to me as well. So just let us know of any resources we have. We're putting this webinar series together to resource caregivers, to resource patients and survivors. So thank you so much to both Felicia and Rani for an incredible presentation tonight. And I want to thank everyone as well for attending our webinar tonight. It's just, yeah, nights like tonight really make a difference. And this webinar series that is going to be cataloged on YouTube really are really going to be helpful for everyone, I think, who has access to them. So this webinar is part of a series that we're calling Cancer Survivor to Financial Survivor. Registration information for next week's webinar is already out, so watch your inboxes and social media feeds for that. Just a quick note about email. If you're not seeing our emails in your inbox, please check your spam or junk mail folders, as we use a third-party email service. So yeah, check your spam or junk mail folders, mark CCSN as safe, or add us to your contacts list to ensure they'll come straight to your inbox and you won't miss another one of our webinars. As always, all of our previous webinars are accessible on demand through our website, www.survivornet.ca/webinars. And this series specifically is being cataloged on another playlist, but it is available on our website as well. So thank you again for attending our webinar tonight, and thank you to Felicia and Rani. Enjoy your night, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.